G'day Thorough Tank crew, I am the Thorough Tank, and this is a quick reference guide to the Vault of the Wardens dungeon on Mythic Keystone difficulty. The video is aimed at helping those who really want to tank, but are paranoid of getting into a group and letting people down. Knowing the route and knowing the shortcuts is a huge part of Keystone tanking, and even something as simple as knowing which mobs to pull and which ones to skip can actually be really intimidating. So this guide is designed to arm you with the information you need to tank for a group of strangers. Regardless of affixes, you're always going to want to start with these 6 mobs to start with in a double pull. There are several casters in this group which you'll need to interrupt in order to move everything together. There's 1 in the first pack and there are 2 in the second pack. I find the easiest thing to do is interrupt the one in the first pack and just drag the first 2 to the back 4. The dangerous mobs in this pack are the casters. They're called Fel Infused, and they have a cast called Nightmares, which, if you don't interrupt it, will stun a target for 3 seconds, can be anyone in the group. When it expires or is removed, it'll deal a wave of shadow energy to everybody around the target. Just make sure this gets interrupted every time, and the group should go down without too much trouble. Coming up next here is a Demon Hunter mini-boss. Just tank her normally for the start of the fight. She doesn't do too much early on. She'll just occasionally throw out her glaives, which you'll need to sidestep. If you get hit by them, they do a big chunk of damage and they'll knock you backwards. So just make sure you step out of their path, don't get hit. However, once she reaches low health, she'll metamorphose into the Havoc Demon Hunter form and activate an Immolation Aura. It'll do a lot of damage to your group and place fire damage patches on the ground. And you'll need to avoid those, while at the same time her melee attacks will start hitting much harder, so this is when you need to save all of your big defensive cooldowns and be very focused to get her down. These patrolling scavenger packs are pretty much a non-issue on any week that isn't bursting or bolstering. However, on those weeks you will need to be careful. Your group will need to kill them all at exactly the same time so that you get all the bursting stacks or bolstering stacks happening at once, and then your healer can compensate from there. You're going to want to pull this next pack backwards. It's dangerous to fight it where it stands. You can aggro a lot of extra mobs, and on some affixes that can cause some real problems. So interrupt the casters in the pack with a silence or an interrupt and bring them back as quick as possible. 2 things to worry about. The demons with the twin swords, the Emollient Furies, will periodically cleave with a fiery damage cleave. Just make sure this is pointed away from the group. I like to back myself into a wall like you see here. And on top of that, the Naga will use an ability called Deafening Screech, which will silence anybody in a cone in front of it. It doesn't really matter too much if you get silenced. Just make sure you're pointing it away from the group so you don't silence your healer. If the affixes you're dealing with include bursting, as you can see here in this video, or bolstering, pull these carefully. Otherwise, just grab everything all at once. It's not really that dangerous, but the affixes can make things a little bit tricky. Up ahead is another double pull with 6 mobs, and it's probably one of the trickiest trash pulls in the dungeon. There's only one mob here that you haven't seen before, the Fel Infused Fury. This mob has 2 abilities. Above 50% health, it'll use an ability called Fel Gaze, which is an eye beam that will rotate around the room and hit everybody in a 360-degree arc. The only way to stop this is with a stun. Below 50% health, it will metamorphose and cast an ability called Unleash Fury, which needs to be interrupted. If that cast finishes, it will one-shot the entire group instantly. If you control both of those abilities, and you'll probably need the help of your group to do that, this pack will go down without any trouble at all. These 2 mobs here before the boss are just a formality. It's another Myrmidon with a frontal silence and one of the casters that needs to be interrupted. It won't give you any trouble when there's only 2 mobs. You've been dealing with much more difficult pulls up to this point. This fight is one of the tougher ones in the dungeon. Use mitigation during dark strikes to make sure he doesn't get his absorb shield. During the first metamorphosis, tank can interrupt the fire elemental adds that he spawns. The most dangerous cast they have is Fel Emission. During the Havoc metamorphosis, make sure to step out of the way of the Eye Beam Hatred. And I find the easiest way to deal with the Fel chain is simply to stand on the left of the room until it gets close, then pop a defensive cooldown and kite the boss through it. Your DPS can run around the fountain and quickly rejoin the boss. Mitigation for dark strikes, tank the adds, move through the Fel chain, and watch out for the Eye Beam. After the boss, just head through either the left or the right door, doesn't matter which, grab all of the imps and drag them up towards the Imp Mother. While you're tanking the Imp Mother, you're going to want to be really careful to make sure you stay within melee range. Like all stationary bosses, it doesn't matter if you've got aggro if you're not nearby her, she'll still melee DPS, so you need to make sure you always stay near her once she's been engaged. Apart from that, just stay out of the stuff on the ground, and she's a pretty easy fight. Inquisitor Torment is definitely the hardest boss fight in this dungeon, but a big reason for that is that people actually overestimate him and panic. He's actually not that complicated. There are 2 things you want to watch out for throughout the fight. Face along the purple beam towards the eyes whenever they target you so that you don't get disoriented. This is pretty simple, but it can be hard to do in the heat of the moment when there's other things going on. And when he casts Sap Soul, you're going to want to use a filler spell so that you don't put your important abilities on cooldown. A quick little cheat note for this: if you're communicating with your healer, they can dispel this off you. It will both remove your buff, and because they used a dispel themselves, it'll remove their own as well. At 70% and 40%, he'll teleport to one of 4 random doors and release some adds which you'll have to fight. This is what scares people about this fight. They are scary, but the same strategy actually can apply to pretty much all the doors. You want to drag the boss on top of one of the caster adds, which will be on either the left or the right. You want to interrupt and stun those casters as much as possible while you kill them. Prioritize the adds over the boss until they're dead. Don't forget about the abilities that continue to happen, like Sap Soul. And if you follow these steps, the specific add abilities don't actually matter too much. Most wipes in this fight actually happen because people get too fixated on the adds and forget about the other 2 basic abilities in the fight, and you end up with a disoriented tank, healers locking themselves out of major healing abilities, and everything just falls apart from there. If you don't do that, you'll be fine. I prefer to kill the Blade Dancer mini-boss with her Fellhound pets. It's worth more percentage than the Dreadlord, and you only have to kill one of them really, so you might as well kill the one that's worth a little bit more. Saves you a little bit of time later on, and you only have to be a little bit careful on bursting or bolstering weeks to make sure everything dies at the same time. Make sure you interrupt the Fellhounds when they're casting Drain, as it's a stun on a random group member. That never targets you, but it's still worthwhile using your interrupt to help your group out. This next boss, Glazer, is an absolutely trivial fight for you as the tank, but your group can really fuck you over if they actually don't know how the fight works. So, first thing you want to do, you want to be standing inside the boss for the entire time that you are tanking him. The reason for this is that these blue pulses that shoot out from him, when they get back to him, they'll hit him and do damage to him. If you dodge them, that's the best way to deal with it. If you're sitting inside his hitbox, you actually cannot be hit by them. When they get to you, they'll hit him before they hit you, and so you don't have to worry about them at all. The only thing you need to be careful of is that if the lingering gaze patches spawn inside the boss, you might need to quickly run out, move him, and then collapse back underneath him again. As soon as the intermission phase starts, you want to make sure you're running around and adjusting the mirrors to be in a position to shoot the beam towards the boss's shield. Once you've done that, you can help out the DPS on killing the add if they still haven't managed to kill the corrupted mirror, but they should have plenty of time, and your DPS isn't really going to contribute too much, so the best bet is just to go for the mirrors yourself. After that, simply get back under the boss and repeat until the fight is over. On high tyrannical keys, you might have to do the shield phase more than once, or if, like in this example here, your group manages to all get themselves killed by the pulses, then you're probably going to have a long fight on your hands as well. After Glazer is down, head out the room, turn left and go down the side hallway to get to the next boss. That way you can skip the mini-boss and you don't ever have to fight. You'll also turn around and come back this way after you kill the next boss so that you can skip the Dreadlord again. This boss is another trivial one for tanks. Make sure somebody activates the countermeasures at the start of the fight and every time they become active again during the fight. Make sure you help out clearing patches of fire. If your group needs some space to move around, you can pick up a patch or 2 of fire and use a cooldown to absorb the damage, and make sure you use your interrupts to control the adds as much as possible. Apart from that, that's a really easy fight and you shouldn't really have any problems at all. After this boss, as mentioned, head back the way you came down the side hallway to skip the Dreadlord. If you have a rogue in your group, you can skip this mini-boss in front of us here by you having a rogue distract him to face one direction and use the Shroud of Concealment to take your group through in the opposite direction, but if you don't, you'll have to fight him. Dodge these fell swirls that appear on the ground. They do an enormous amount of damage even to the tank, and you want to make sure you step out of them ASAP. And on very high keys, stand in the Torment ability if your group members can't get out of the snare, and that will help share the damage so that they don't take quite as much of it. Grab the light yourself at the bottom of the lift and then head over to the first pack of 4 spiders. Just tank them normally. They don't really do anything you need to worry about. Just keep them grouped up as much as possible. On all affix weeks except bolstering, you'll want to hug the left through here and drop down through the gap in the rock wall, drop down on top of the spirit and kill the spider and all that stuff down there together. However, this is bursting week, so we need to do a little bit differently. This patrolling pack of spiders patrols all the way down to the bottom of the area. If you drop down through the normal shortcut, it's very easy for this pack to surprise you in the middle of combat down there. If it's bursting or bolstering, you can suddenly find that you're fighting way too many mobs to be safe. So what I like to do is go and find this patrol. In this video I was lucky enough that it was right at the top for me, but you might have to go a bit further down the hallway to grab it. Once you've killed it first, then you can either backtrack and go down the hole, or you can just continue down the ramp and fight from there. Either way, you'll want to jump on top of this Spirit of Vengeance against the cliff and tank the spiders directly on top. The Spirit will do a knockback on you, so make sure you put your back to a wall if you're not a demon hunter. And the important thing to note is this is another stationary mob. If you're not nearby, it will melee anybody who is, even if you still have aggro. So make sure you get back in range when you get knocked away and just DPS everything down. You might accidentally find that you aggro the Spirit a little bit off to the side here. If you do, just make sure you go over there and kill it. You can tell whether you've aggroed it, even if you're not in combat, by the fact that it will be shifting around from foot to foot, and it'll also be throwing things at your party members. So make sure you're ready to fight that if you need to. If at any point you find that someone in your party has accidentally grabbed the attention of a different spirit, you'll need to run forward a bit and it'll teleport down to follow you. This spirit that we're fighting right here is actually the one that was right up the top and near the shortcut. Someone's aggroed it, gotten a bit too close, and so we had to run forward a bit and engage the Broodmother in order to actually be able to make the spirit come down so we could fight it again. The Broodmother herself doesn't do anything dangerous. She'll snare you, which does actually prevent you from being knocked back in the razor wire, but apart from that, there's nothing that you need to worry about. Just tank them normally, and once you've killed everything, the doors will open and you'll be able to head down to Cordana. This is another easy one for tanks. Make sure you keep space behind you for the knockback, unless you're a demon hunter. Don't get hit by the flaming glaives, as it puts a huge fire damage dot on the whole party if someone gets hit. If you're using the light, clear out shadow patches by throwing the light on top of them. At 40%, when the shadow walls spawn, navigate the gaps. If you watch the edges where they spawn, they'll actually be visible for a second and you can see where the gap is even if you haven't got the light. It becomes a test of memory at that point. After the shadow wave phase, drag her to the back left statue in the room. An avatar will spawn next to that one and cast an immunity shield. It's always the same statue. You can use a stun to interrupt the immunity shield and be able to keep DPSing the boss. And at some point in this phase, she'll cast 2 more ghost walls. If it's not tyrannical, you likely won't ever have to deal with this. You'll probably kill her before it becomes an issue. But if you need to deal with it, just make sure you deal with the shadow walls and drag her through the gaps. And that brings us to the end of Vault of the Wardens. It's not that difficult a dungeon overall. It's not one of the ones that tends to give groups too many problems, but it does have a few tricky parts in it, and there are plenty of spaces where a knowledgeable tank can really give their group an advantage. Hope this has given you the confidence to go out there and tank for some strangers who are going to judge you for it. And if you like this video, leave a comment below letting me know your feedback, and I'd love to hear from you guys. Take it easy.